The Washington Commanders had a desperate need at wide receiver. After drafting Terry McLaurin in the 3rd round, they haven't really had anybody outside of him that was consistent. Over the years, they've attempted to fill that void. They signed Paul Richardson in free agency. Last year, they went after Curtis Samuels, but he's been injured. And now, more recently, they just drafted Jahan Dotson out of Penn State. Now, this pick does come with its own controversy. Washington had the choice to stay at 11th, but they decided to move back 5 spots to grab an extra 3rd and 4th round pick. Some have claimed that they panicked after they hoped that somebody else would fall. I disagree with that assumption, but we'll talk more about that later on. For now, let's dive into Dotson's film. Let me show you what he brings to the Commanders' offense. Before we begin though, if you can do me a huge favor and like and subscribe to my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. So anyways, if there is one thing you need to know about Jahan Dotson is how good he is at running stems, how he sets up the top of his routes to create separation. That skill set is up there at the top of this class. Dotson is incredible at using variable speed to get open. On a single route, you'll see him shift between his gears, and this completely throws off a defender. On hitches, for example, he'll start slow, accelerate into the break, and then he'll throttle down and sit wide open for his quarterback. This also applies to how he runs intermediate breaks and deep routes down the field. Dotson has amazing footwork to set up all these routes. That variable change of speed is his best trait by far. It's going to allow him to be a really good weapon in the pros. Outside of variable speed, Dotson has good ball skills to bring down a throw. Simply put, his catch radius is excellent for a guy his size. Dotson is 5'11" and weighs around 178 pounds. How he can fully extend his arms to bring in balls outside his frame makes him feel much bigger than he actually is. He'll contort his body in the air, he has good awareness on the sideline to get his feet down in bounds, and he rarely drops a pass. Looking at his advanced stats, Dotson had a drop rate of only 2.2%. Out of 250 wide receivers that had more than 50 targets, Dotson ranked 12th in that metric. I love how he concentrates to bring in throws, and he's always willing to help his quarterback. He'll work back towards the ball, and he'll finish the catch cleanly before he breaks up the field. Speaking of advanced stats, Dotson created 2.6 yards per route run. On the same 250 wide receivers that had more than 50 targets, that's good for 49th. That's pretty solid considering the poor quarterback play he had in the final year at Penn State. With a drop rate of roughly 2%, roughly 30% of his throws were uncatchable. The average last season was right around 1.7, so him getting 2.6 is pretty good. Now obviously, some of the other wide receivers on your screen did better in this metric. This is a decent argument for why those other players were drafted earlier than he was. However, this metric is not an end-all be-all type of stat. Differences in scheme and quarterback play definitely contribute to these numbers. Previously, I mentioned his footwork and his catch radius. The other thing that I have to say is that what impressed me about Dotson was how he was used in this offense. His route tree was gigantic for a wide receiver in college. He was trusted by his coaches to make plays, and he consistently did that. He ran slants, he ran digs, he ran posts, hitches, corners, he was used on screens, and he was also used as a weapon out of the backfield. I love how he runs each of these routes, and especially how he attacks zone coverage. His ability to find holes and use his awareness and football IQ to make plays was really good. He seemed to have a sixth sense on where to sit in order to get open. Plus, with this awesome catch radius that we talked about earlier, he became a high-value target for Penn State's offense. I want to look closely at one play against Michigan. This play right here shows why his team trusted him. Lining up in shotgun, Penn State used a short motion moving Dotson from wide left into the slot. Seeing how the defense adjusted this motion, it's likely they were changing their coverage on the outside. They played a combo coverage with the right side playing zone, while the left side played man coverage after the snap. I want you to watch Dotson's route closely. He's running a pivot route attacking the middle of the field before breaking outside. He starts his play by running a slant route inside. His approach and how he breaks on this slant is exactly how he ran his other routes. He doesn't give away the fact that he's breaking back towards the sideline. Dotson then stretches out with his inside leg while skidding his outside foot in order to help him with the turn. He then uses his outside arm to swipe the defender to ensure that he has a clean break. Now he does stumble a little bit, but he recovers well and he's able to look back towards his quarterback. The ball's already in the air, so Dotson tracks it smoothly and he brings it in for the first down. This is an excellent play because it shows how he was featured in this offense. He ran a variety of routes and he has the athleticism to execute them all with ease. His ability to use the same stems on his other routes to create double moves is a really good trait. He's very consistent in running routes exactly like this. He does a phenomenal job with deception, and he even throws a nice head fake or stutter footwork into his plays in order to sell his moves. For example, his game against Ohio State started slow, but once they started actually targeting him in the second half, the offense started to move down the field. Now, while Dotson clearly has a lot of strengths, he's not the type of player that's going to win consistently against press coverage. I think his release package on the line of scrimmage is pretty good. However, his play strength and his hand fighting skills to keep his body clean are below average. He's going to have to work very hard to improve at this trait. I think against the more aggressive press teams in the NFL, he's going to have a very hard time separating. He'll likely start as a slot receiver that gets moved around the field to begin his career. You'll need that extra distance because in some games and against some very aggressive cornerbacks, Dotson was completely eliminated for the play. Outside of that previous play against Michigan that we broke down, Dotson had a really hard time separating against NFL talent. Daxton Hill and Vincent Gray, who were both picked in this year's NFL draft, they both gave him a very hard time. Dotson merely won on his routes against zone coverage. He didn't win that many routes against press, and this extends to many of his other games too. Now, obviously, not every team in the NFL has a good press cornerback, but after seeing this, I would definitely put a more aggressive cornerback on him if I was the defensive coordinator. I would attempt to ride him out of the play in main coverage. Out of everything I saw, this was my main issue by far. Outside of beating press, he had a few minor things he needed to work on. At times, he would round his route to the top of stems, and I feel like he took one too many steps at the top of his breaks. I think there's a little bit of hip tightness there and how that affects his ability to fully turn his body. His 3-cone time wasn't good, only at a 7.3, and I think this is where it comes up. This isn't a huge deal, but it does affect his upside. Combined together, the inability to beat press consistently and him having some hip tightness at the top of his routes, I think these were the main factors why many didn't have him as a first-round prospect in this year's draft. Now for his pro comparison. The two players I see when I watch Dotson are Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett. The three of them had eerily similar metrics coming out. They all ran in the 4.4s in the 40-yard dash. They all stood at just under 6 feet tall, weighing around 180 pounds. Their vertical jumps were between 35 and 37 inches, and their broad jumps were just over 10 feet. The key difference between these players, though, is that Dotson's 3-cone time was much worse. Both Baldwin and Lockett ran a sub 7-second 3-cone time. Dotson's slower 3-cone time at 7.3 is the key difference. Hopefully Dotson just tested poorly that day because I feel like his tape showed a more agile runner. Now, at the start of this video, I mentioned the controversy of trading back in the first round. At 11th, Washington had the choice between Chris Olave and Jameson Williams. Olave is the guy that many thought they would take. He was seen as one of the best wide receivers in this class, while Dotson was viewed as the next tier type of player. For me personally, I had Dotson as a late first or early second round grade. Taking him at 16th was definitely a bit of a reach. However, Washington wanted to pick up more ammo later on. They were able to grab running back Brian Robinson out of Alabama, as well as linebacker Brandon Smith out of Penn State. Linebacker was a definite need, while adding Brian Robinson will create a great 1-2 punch with Antonio Gibson. And I say that fully knowing that Gibson's fantasy value just got hurt. But as far as the team is concerned, there's a legitimate argument for collecting these assets later on. Remember, this was the season that was greatly affected by COVID in terms of how many players deferred for the following year. This year's draft class was definitely older. Having a quantity of picks in day 2 and day 3 was the move that other teams made as well. Check out the Vikings, who moved from the 12th overall all the way down to the start of the second round. Now going back to Dotson though, I can see why they like him, especially in Scott Turner's offense. He runs a ton of vertical concepts, and Dotson has the skill set to be awesome in this scheme. He's going to be used all over the field, and I can imagine him running a dagger concept with Dotson alongside Terry McLaurin. He can have Dotson running the go with his speed, while McLaurin runs inside on the dig. The good news is that Dotson can also run that dig, while McLaurin can run the go. This awesome route running ability by Dotson definitely improves his team. It was rich for sure, and while his name is similar to another former first-round wide receiver that busted in Washington, he does have a lot of skill. I just really hope he can keep getting better at beating press man coverage, and if he does, Dotson could become a really good wide receiver in the NFL. Well, that's all I have for you in this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Next up, I'll keep looking at more prospects and how they fit in their respective teams. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel, as well if you want to support me directly, follow the link to my Patreon below. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Samuel R. Gold.